I've seen this book too many times, so at this point, I am committed to finishing it. So if you aren't familiar, The Artist's Way is basically kind of like a challenge or like a way for creatives to jumpstart their inspiration, creativity, or if you're just kind of like looking for change in your life, kind of just a little something to kickstart that. I'm kind of looking at it like a challenge. I don't think it's necessarily that intense, but there are things that you do daily that you implement as part of a daily routine. And then you're also supposed to come back weekly because there are like activities or journal prompts or whatever. One of the things that she encourages daily is these morning pages. Like they are an absolute necessity. So as soon as you get up in the morning, grab a pen and a notebook, and you're literally just going to be a stream of consciousness for 3 pages. What she says is it doesn't have to be grammatically correct. You're not supposed to reread it. You're not supposed to be like trying to like officially write something with sentences. Like it's literally just a stream of consciousness. The reason she recommends this is because once we jumpstart our day, the inner critic or the inner censor starts to come in. So a lot of artists or a lot of creatives will sit down and they're like, okay, I want to create this content. And then it's like they start censoring themselves, or like, oh, somebody's not going to like this. It's like they start having all of these thoughts that are blocking the creative process and just allowing you to create or talk or whatever. The second thing is she recommends going on artist dates. I'm going to do 1 a week. So basically an artist date, you are all by yourself and it is a dedicated time to something, just like you being creative. So maybe that's going for a walk, maybe that's cutting up a magazine. It could be as cheap or as expensive or as whatever. The goal is for you to really just be by yourself and see what you want to do during that time. And it can be as long or as short as possible. This is not supposed to be something that's super duper restricted. Like, oh, I should go to the craft store, or maybe I should go here. Like, you're really just kind of following the nudges and just like playing. So all of that was just the introduction. I'm going to officially start week 1 tomorrow, and I plan on documenting the whole process, and I'm intending that I don't quit. So I'll let you know. Week 1. And one of the things that she said kind of stuck out to me. It says, she's talking about the concept of internalized negativity. And she says a lot of times when people are blocked, it's because of this internalized negativity. And it's funny because I see this a lot on social media. So when a person is blocked, a lot of times they will sit on the sidelines critiquing other people that are like not blocked or like really thriving. So they'll say things like they're not talented and like, you know, they basically make a lot of these like negative comments about how great that they're doing. And she's saying it's not just jealousy. It's a stalling technique. So it's something that reinforces staying stuck. And when people are stuck, they are safe. And it's something that we do unconsciously. So it's not like people are consciously walking around like, I want to be stuck. I don't want to go for things. I don't want to put myself out there. Not necessarily. It's that being stuck and like not putting yourself out there and not doing these things keeps us safe. And I can make a whole other video about that, but I just thought that that was fascinating. Reading The Artist's Way. I'm on week 1, and one of the first journal prompts is she wants you to write about the enemies of your creativity. So you're essentially like trying to remember these like moments where your creativity was stifled or you were rejected for your creativity. These moments where you like had a creative moment or wanted to have a creative moment and you were kind of shot down and it's stuck with you. It's weird because I forgot about this memory until I didn't. It immediately popped into my head. Every single high school in the area had one of these like fun Facebook groups. Cutesy things about the high school, like, oh, you know, you go to Starview High and it was just like a bonding thing. Our high school didn't have one, so I was like, oh, I'll just do it. Like, it's not a problem. I don't mind. Googled a bunch of pictures of my high school, threw it in the group. No big deal. Left it. This guy flipped out. Like, when I tell you they were the nastiest hate comments, I remember just sitting there and being like, I don't understand why you're so, like, I literally didn't understand why he was so mad about this Facebook group. And it took me a while for me to get, like, what was going on. But apparently, one of the pictures was a photo of a baseball game. And at this baseball game, one of his friends broke a bone and it was like really emotional for the team. It really bothered them. And looking back, a piece of me is like, all right, I get it. Even to this day, as a 30-something-year-old, I'm like, that was such a severe overreaction. How mean this person was to me over something that I literally just didn't And I was like asking other people and they were like, I don't get it. I don't know. But it was just like, I immediately deleted the group and I was like, it's just not worth it. It's not worth me putting myself out there for such an extreme negative experience. Maybe I just like learned or took on that it's not worth me putting myself out there if it's going to come with all of this negativity. Anyway, I guess I don't really know how to end. It's just an interesting thing to think about. Like, I think about some of my favorite authors or some of my favorite books. If they listened to the one person who threw an absolute hissy fit, and they pulled the book and it just never came into fruition, that would be such an incredible bummer. Week 2 of Artist's Way. One of the big things that she talks about in week 2 is protecting your creativity. I kind of interchange creativity with authenticity because she says that being creative is your authentic state. So if you're having a hard time being creative, you're kind of pulled out of your authenticity. That was at least my take on it. So she talks about how important it is to protect your creativity while you're going through this process, like protect it from people who are blocked. If you watched my last video, she talks about people who are blocked are people that maybe they're not really in their creativity. They're not in their authenticity. The reason why she says to protect it is because it could undo some of your progress and you may be triggered by these other people. When you're kind of going through this creative, authentic process, a lot of times people will kind of like pull you into staying the same. And guilt is an obvious, easy tactic to use, whether it's intentional or not intentional. It's kind of just like the natural course of things. Another thing that I found really interesting is she talks about the more you support yourself, on this journey, doing the work and things like that, supportive people will find you. When you start supporting yourself, supportive people will also come in because you're getting rid of all the people and things that are in your way and you're creating space for those other people to come in and like match that energy, if you will. Really the biggest takeaway is to just give yourself the gift of faith and just trust this process and trust yourself and keep going. It's very much giving life coach. This is with anything. When you start a new way of being, when you start a new process, you have to give it enough time to unfold. So I can say for me personally during this week, like I haven't really seen anything. Like I'm enjoying the morning pages. Like, do I feel like a whole new, brand new person? No, but it's only week 2. Like you really just have to trust the process and keep going. So let me know if you're reading it. Let me know your thoughts. Artist's Way week 3. This week was a good one, so I may have to make this in multiple parts. So the first thing that she talks about is how anger is meant to be heard, not necessarily by other people, but by you. It's meant to be acted on, not acted out. She describes anger as a map. It's a map to what you dislike, what you like, where you're going. It can be used as a channel for change. It could really be used as a catalyst if done right. So really by listening to yourself and acting on it rather than lashing out about it. She says that anger is a friend. It's not a gentle one, but a loyal one. It's always going to tell us where we've been betrayed or if we've betrayed ourselves. That way we can start acting in our best interest. Not necessarily selfish interest, but our best interest. She also talks about this concept of answered prayers. So, when you've been praying for something for a really long time and you really, really want it to happen, she said sometimes answered prayers can be scary because they require responsibility. So, the whole concept of be careful what you wish for. This is kind of what she's talking about. She says you may wish for things, but then you don't want to take the necessary steps when given the opportunity because things can get uncomfortable. So if you are wishing for something and you are wanting for something to happen, you have to make sure that you are ready to jump on that responsibility and do what you have to do. She said a lot of times people write off things as synchronicities. So she gave the example. She says a woman wants to get into acting. So she's seated next to someone who teaches actors at a local university. Oftentimes something like this may be dismissed as a coincidence or like, oh, it's just a little synchronicity, but really it's an opportunity. Artist's Way, week 3, part 2. There are a lot of things in this chapter. She touches on a lot of different subjects, but one of the ones that I thought was most interesting was this concept of shame. She says people will do anything to avoid feeling shame, especially children. And logically, that makes a lot of sense. Shame is a really icky, yucky emotion. She says that sometimes when you are working on a project, or you can apply this even to relationships, you can apply it to anything. Like sometimes when people are in the middle of something, let's say an art project, they will be zapped of motivation when they reach the end. It's like right before it's time to like take it to the next level or potentially release it to the public and be seen, they are zapped of all motivation. And It's tough when you're zapped of motivation and inspiration, especially if you're a content creator or an artist or something where you need to be like expressing yourself, because that's such a driving force. It's important to investigate this and dive a little deeper. Are you truly lacking motivation? Is this thing not resonating with you? Are you not motivated? Why? Like, go a step further, especially if you're noticing a pattern of going 80% into something and veering off. Just go a little deeper before completely abandoning something, because potentially you could be avoiding experiencing shame, and you avoid experiencing shame by not fully putting yourself out there so people can weigh in and comment. And especially when it comes to like creative endeavors, whether that's like TikTok or whatever, people are going to give their opinion. They're going to criticize. They are going to weigh in, because that's what art is. Like, art is meant to be discussed. It's meant to be examined. It's meant to be looked at. And it's important that you learn to feel safe with criticism and what criticism to take on versus not take on. So it was a very interesting week. If nothing else, week 3 is gold. Artist Way, week 4. This week was all about just building the identity. And one big thing that she talks about is this concept of letting go. She says people hear this all the time, but the problem is they don't know what they're holding on to. And this is why she emphasizes how the morning pages are so incredibly important, because that's the one place where you're having this like open, honest dialogue with yourself. And you may start to pick up on like these rules and these things that aren't really serving you, or are kind of like rotting in the back of your mind, or like in a corner of your life somewhere. She also talks about this concept of I don't know who I am. And she said, when this happens, that could be a really good way to indicate that this process is working, because you're ridding yourself of all of the pretend, all of the distractions, all the things that you've picked up throughout the course of your life that maybe aren't for you. You've kind of just like picked them up and hung on to them. She uses the example of a low self-worth shirt. Maybe you bought something when you like weren't really feeling good about yourself. You're like, I want to like start working on myself. This shirt is really trendy, so I'm going to buy it. And that shirt was never you. You bought it because you were feeling insecure, and you kind of thought that was going to be like a band-aid, or like a way that you could start like feeling better. Something else that she just really talks about in this week is how releasing makes room for the new. And something that I've observed, and she touches on it a little bit, I see this with my coaching clients, and I've seen this on my own journey. When you are releasing a bunch of things and making room for new, it may be an emotional process. You may even feel relieved for some things. It really depends on like what these things represent to you. There are so many factors. And she says, something to just keep in mind is like, even though these things may be emotional and they may be upsetting, something new is also growing. I know it may feel like it's easier to go back to the old because you don't want to feel emotional, but when something dies, something new blooms. One more thing. She also says that some changes may be small, so pay attention. All right, week 5 of the Artist's Way. So I'm going to just be honest. I was kind of like half in and half out this week. Like, I didn't feel as committed to completing this week, but I still have a couple notes. First note that I have is she asks, where can I create more space? Like a clutter detox of like things in your life, your schedule, habits. Just like start kind of noticing what things are like sparking joy, what things kind of feel like a task, what things you're maybe doing unnecessarily. She also talks about gentle exploration, just going out and trying things. Like, people, especially in the law of attraction community, talk about like taking action, and people constantly want to like go out and take action on their dreams. And she says people think that you have to go around like shaking trees to get fruit. And she says, of course, like that may be one of your steps, but a huge part of this journey is being open to just receiving things and playing with life. Because all these people go around shaking apple trees trying to get their fruit, when really an orange tree is maybe what they need. So they go around doing all this stuff, but it's not necessarily the right stuff. So during this part of her process, she says be less focused on the action and the shaking of the trees. Do the work that's in the book and see what sparks and go from there. It's like, instead of all this like forced action in the name of productivity, it's like conscious, intentional action. She talks about just like putting everyone else's needs before your own, and she calls this self-sabotaging. She's like, there is a time and a place for helping. Like, there is a time and a place for like really being of assistance and a kind person, but those things require discernment, and they also require you to be in a good place. But people get so stuck on like making other people happy, or like, they basically want to be seen as this generous, kind of service, helpful person. And it's like, by you wanting to be seen this certain way, or because you're like worried about other people's reactions, you're still not living for yourself, which is self-destructive. So I think this chapter was really interesting, or this week was really interesting, because it was just about like gentle like exploration, really paying attention and really starting to learn how to live for yourself and be intentional in your decisions and actions. So if you have any questions, I'm here. Week 6 of The Artist's Way. So I liked this chapter. It was all about money and artistic abundance. And one of the interesting points that she says is how we starve ourselves of luxuries. So she doesn't necessarily mean like riches. She means just like artistic pleasures. So for example, she talks about like, this is kind of like a big example, but she talks about buying a horse. And when she bought this horse, people were immediately like, hope you don't expect to ride it much. You know, you're so busy all the time. And she said that it made her really sad because it just reminded her of how often people shame creatives out of like their happiness and out of their pleasure. Talks about how there's this like ingrained belief in society that you should be working instead of indulging in creative pleasures. Like whenever people are like being silly or artistic or creative or whatever, people are always like shaming them and like telling them that they should be doing something that's like productive. He says when you put a stopper on joy, you're also putting a stopper on receiving inspiration, you're putting a stopper on receiving gifts, and all of these things could also equate to money. And that's when your life starts to get filled with meaningless things because you stopped partaking in interest and you started forcing yourself to do everything else, be everyone else, and just like partake in this like, I almost want to say society, like just like the norm of like what everybody's doing. One of my favorite parts was she talked a little bit about luxury and how we starve ourselves of luxury sometimes. And again, she's not talking about like the Prada bag. She's talking about like raspberries at the supermarket. That was her big example. She used to look at raspberries at the grocery store and she absolutely loved them, but they were expensive. And she's like, well, how much are raspberries? And she's like, $5, which is a lot. And she's like, well, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. Like $5 is a lot, but is $5 a lot for something that brings you so much joy? It's like finding these little luxuries in our life. Like raspberries to her was a luxury and it really gave her a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment. And $5 in the grand scheme of life isn't that much. Like what is $5 like every couple months? You know what I mean? She says that this concept of luxury is a learned practice. Like indulging in life and like the little pleasures in life is a learned practice. She says many of us are Cinderellas. We focus on everyone else all the time. We feel threatened by the idea of spoiling ourselves, even if it's the $5 raspberries. And you don't throw out Cinderella. You don't throw yourself away or like shame yourself, but instead you give yourself the glass slipper little by little. So it's these small luxuries that open yourself up and like train yourself to be more receptive. You know, you feel more willing to receive help, receive money, receive inspiration. If you can't receive the little things like treating yourself to raspberries once in a while, how do you think you're going to be able to receive these big things? It's going to be harder to receive because it's so much more of a reach. Week 7 of The Artist's Way. I have a feeling this is going to be a little scattered, so trust the process. So this week was all about listening and being open and like willing to accept help. And she doesn't necessarily say like where this help will come, but just being open to it and it will come. She says it's important for you to expect that. Expect that you will receive inspiration. Expect that you will receive downloads. Expect that you will receive help. Don't force it. Don't make it happen. It's about listening and again, being open and willing to just accept help and willing for it to come to you rather than you go to it. I loved this part. She talks about the concept of perfectionism. She says it is not about having high standards or fixing something. To put simply, perfectionism is a refusal to let yourself move ahead. So she says, do not fear mistakes because there are none. To the perfectionist, there is always room for improvement. And you know, perfectionists want to call it humility, but it's not humility. It's not this like super noble thing. It's actually ego and it's pride. It's like you don't want people to, you're not willing to let people see you be vulnerable or making mistakes. And in order to be willing to do something well, you must be willing to do it badly. If you only perform when you're sure that you'll be successful, you're going to end up stifling yourself and you're going to be bored and you're just going to be back in this like trapped box. She talks about how we will unrealistically expect and demand success from ourselves, and we will also demand or expect recognition from other people. And this is also something that will keep you stuck in a box. Like you're only willing to pick up safe things. You're only willing to pick up things where people are telling you you're doing a good job. And it's why some actors will fulfill the same role again and again and again, and they'll just consistently keep doing romances when, you know, maybe they really want to try thriller, but they're afraid that they're going to fail, or they're afraid of what people will say about them. She says, when you take risks, you will start to feel more empowered because you are expanding your self-definition. And we say this in coaching all the time. We say like how it's all connected. By taking a risk and by doing a marathon, it may lead you to writing a play or a novel or whatever, vice versa. It's about expanding and taking risks that open you up more, and you build your self-esteem and you build your self-concept that yes, you can do scary and difficult things over here, so you could do them over there. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. That was everything from week 7, and stay tuned for week 8. I just read this, so I have to share. It's from The Artist's Way. So she basically says, people who are blocked like to think that they have to change their entire life in one full swoop. It's like this grandiose thinking is actually their undoing. They think that they need to quit their job, flee the country, divorce whoever, like just completely do this like big brand new life in order to start feeling happy or to start like living a more aligned life. And so basically she says that this is their undoing because you start setting the jumps too high, the price tag is far too great. It's like an enormous amount of change, and it's like defeat in motion. She goes on to say, like, who can concentrate on taking the small necessary steps or laying the foundation when you're sitting there stressed out about like, how am I going to quit my job, or like, how am I going to do this, or how am I going to make that work? And she says the odds are that your life actually changes. You become unblocked, and you know, you become more creative and so on and so forth by a lot of tiny steps, a lot of small steps, and very few leaps. It's like people force themselves onto the edge and they're like, I can't leap. And she's like, no one's asking you to leap. Like, you're indulging in your drama. She says every single day, there is always one action you can take. There's always one small thing that you can do. It's like we kind of like get in our heads too much and we start overthinking our actions and thinking we have to do all these like huge things. And that's not the case. It's these very small micro decisions that continue to move us forward and build consistency rather than, you know, these huge leaps that just like stop us in our tracks. Week 8 of The Artist's Way. This week she talks a lot about like taking back your power in a sense. So the first thing she kind of touches on is mourning the loss of artistic losses. So for example, like the books that don't sell, the ankle injury, the paintings that aren't accepted. It's okay, and it's important to acknowledge and mourn that. She says, like, when you don't mourn or acknowledge these things, it can sometimes turn into this, like, well, who was I kidding anyway? Or that it becomes like this weird barrier that you've created in yourself. So mourn and acknowledge the rejection, work through it, and then keep going. It's like if you ignore a sore muscle, it can turn into something worse. So it's really the same with your feelings. It's important to acknowledge, mourn. It's okay to be upset about like your losses in terms of like the things that you create, but you have to have the audacity to keep going. She then kind of shifts over to something she calls the ivory power, which is kind of the issue with academics and creativity. And this is something that I kind of saw as a teacher too. It's like, in these academic settings, they want to provide you with feedback because, you know, academics are kind of like based on society. It's like based on norms. But as the artist, you have to understand like when to kind of take on that feedback or criticism and when to just like listen to it and kind of keep it moving. Again, it comes back to like, you can't let this type of feedback or these types of institutions like get in your way. You have to have the audacity to like continue to push. She basically just uses creative writing classes as an example. Like your work may be taken apart and all of like your shortfalls may be pointed out in a piece of work, when in reality, maybe what you needed was more encouragement. It's like, as the artist, it's almost your responsibility to kind of like work through some of the pain that comes from that feedback and yet keep going. Hi. So the next part, she goes on to discuss gain disguised as loss. So every single ending, every single rejection, there is a new beginning. Always. One door opens, another one closes. But people get so caught up in the belief that if the present is painful, if this ending is painful, then the future must be too. And it's like, we're afraid that we're going to keep experiencing these doors closing. So it's like we protect ourselves. And she's like, this pain is actually incredibly powerful. She's like, this also offers you the opportunity to ask how instead of why me. She says, if you want to catch the ball, stop complaining about the throws and to just keep reaching out your hand. And while that sounds insensitive and it's kind of like, all right, like it's not always that easy, I think she acknowledges that. I think she gets that. But what I think she's really trying to like get people to understand is like, you have to just keep going. You have to keep advocating for yourself. You have to keep like being bold in your creativity and just like going for it. Week 9 of The Artist's Way. So I'm just going to jump right in. She talks about procrastination and laziness and how more often than not is really just fear. And she said it's very important to call it what it is, because people who are blocked often expel a ton of energy, whether it's doubt, self-hatred, regret, worry, jealousy, just like wasting all of this energy. And she said, again, call it what it is. Maybe it's a fear of abandonment, a fear of failure. A lot of these things stem from childhood conditioning. And when people are feeling this way, a lot of times there are no baby steps. It's big tasks. It's all or nothing thinking. She says most of your childhood wasn't a choice. So when you're an adult, it's all about deconditioning that and choosing something different. So when you set out to do big things, whether you're leaving your job, changing careers, moving, whatever it is, guilt will show up. And as a result, you set these huge goals to justify this rebellion. There's almost this pressure, like I need to make it big. I need to produce good work. And it's through these goals and pressure that a person cracks. So again, it's about permission to take baby steps. It's acknowledging the fear of not being good enough, the fear of failing, the fear of not finishing, or this being a waste, or beginning again, or looking stupid, whatever it is. The antidote to fear is not yelling at yourself. It's love. It's be nice to yourself, take baby steps, and literally just call it what it is. Week 10 of The Artist's Way. So there was a lot of good stuff in here, but what I found most interesting was the drug of competition. So she talks about the spirit of competition versus the spirit of creation. And she says when you are in competition, the problem is that it's constantly urging us to like quickly winnow in and out of things, especially if they don't seem like a good idea. So this gets in the way of you completing things or seeing at their full term and potential and like what if. And it also encourages snap judgments. So like, does this project deserve to live? Yes or no? Are we winning right now? Yes or no? When in reality, beauty, success, hits, all these things take time. So not everything is born beautiful, but it can become beautiful. Again, when you're not like rushing to win and you're allowing creation to unfold. So not everything is an immediate hit. It needs time to mature. It needs time to reach the right audience or whatever, to be appreciated. So to put simply, she basically says, you are on your own path, especially when it comes to like your version of success, authenticity, creativity. You are on your own path. Ugly paintings can get you down a new path or a new type of art, but you have to be willing to take that personal journey, and so many people aren't. So many people are just obsessed with this idea of winning and competition, and they'll jump around because they want to win so badly, even though there's no competition, there's no prize. You're competing or putting pressure on yourself to fight with yourself, and you're robbing yourself essentially. So that's everything for week 10, and I'll leave it there.